Before the sun set over the Louisiana swamps, a master would beg for mercy from the woman he thought he owned. Sarah knew it the moment the black liquid touched the silver spoon. 3 drops. That was all it would take to turn a lie into a funeral, and a slave into a murderer. The nursery air was thick and wet, the kind of Louisiana heat that clung to skin and made breathing feel like work. The curtains hung limp over tall windows, barely moving. A single fly buzzed lazily against the glass. The slow creak of the rocking chair echoed through the room like an old warning no one had listened to. In the silver cradle beside her, the Thorn heir struggled for breath. The baby's tiny chest rose in shallow, uneven pulls. His hands trembled against the silk blanket, small fingers twitching in a rhythm that didn't belong to any healthy child. To the world, he was the future of the Thorn Plantation. To Silas Thorne, he was an investment, the key to an inheritance that could save him from ruin. To Sarah, he was a wound that never stopped bleeding. She was his wet nurse, forced to feed him, forced to rock him, forced to love him just enough to keep him alive. 3 months earlier, Silas had sold her own infant son to a trader headed for New Orleans. Not out of desperation, not out of necessity, out of spite and gambling debt. She still remembered the weight of her child being torn from her arms, the way his tiny shirt smelled of milk and smoke from the hearth. She had been given less than a minute to say goodbye. Now she was expected to pour her life into another woman's child, a child whose father stood in the doorway watching her like a hawk watches prey. Silas Thorne didn't look like a man admiring his son. He looked like a man inspecting damaged property. His eyes were red from drink and sleepless nights. His fingers twitched near the pocket of his waistcoat, where a small cobalt blue vial rested like a hidden sin. It had started a week ago. The baby's tremors had grown worse, a sickness that ran in the Thorn bloodline, a weakness Silas had spent his life pretending didn't exist. Because Silas Thorne was not just a cruel man, he was a desperate one. His wealthy uncle, Bartholomew Thorne, was dying, and he had made one thing brutally clear. His fortune would pass only to a man who could prove his bloodline was strong. No sick heirs, no flawed sons. If the old man saw the tremors, Silas would lose everything. So Silas brought the vial. He had pressed it into Sarah's hand, his voice low and sharp like a knife at her throat. "Medicine," he said. But Sarah knew the smell the moment she uncorked it. Opium, strong, concentrated, enough to quiet the shaking. By slowing the child's body to a crawl, enough to make a baby look peaceful, while slowly stealing his breath. "If he shakes when my uncle is here," Silas had whispered, "I'll have you whipped until you beg for death." And if the child didn't survive, Silas had already spoken to the town doctor, already planted the idea that Sarah was unstable, grieving, dangerous. The plan was perfect. A grieving slave poisons the air. A heartbroken father buries his son and inherits a fortune. But Silas Thorne forgot something. Slaves see everything, and the ones who stay quiet the longest know where all the secrets are buried. Sarah lowered the spoon, her hand steady despite the storm inside her chest. She could obey and become the weapon he needed, or she could refuse and become the target he would destroy. Either way, someone in this house was going to die. A soft knock tapped at the nursery door. 2 quick, 1 slow. Caleb, the blacksmith, the only man on the plantation who still looked at her like she was human. She opened the door just enough for his soot-stained hand to slip through with a folded scrap of paper. His whisper was barely air. "Check the floorboards." Sarah's heart stopped. She knew exactly which floorboards he meant. And suddenly, the poison in her hand wasn't the only weapon in the house. The hallway outside the nursery felt colder than it should have. Sarah stepped out quietly, easing the door shut behind her so the latch wouldn't click. Every sound in the big house carried: the tick of the long case clock downstairs, the clink of glass from the parlor, Silas's booming laugh as he entertained men he owed money to, men who would happily watch a slave hang if it meant their debts got paid. She moved barefoot across the polished wood floor, her steps silent from years of practice. Servants learned early how to move without being noticed. It was a survival skill, like holding your tongue or lowering your eyes. Silas's study sat at the end of the hall. The door was half closed, warm lamplight spilling through the crack like a warning. Sarah paused, listening. No voices, no footsteps, only the faint scratch of tree branches against the window glass. She slipped inside. The study smelled of tobacco, ink, and the sour bite of spilled whiskey. Shelves of leather-bound books lined the walls, most never opened. A large desk sat near the window, papers stacked in careful piles meant to look honest. But Caleb hadn't said, "Check the desk." He said, "The floorboards." Sarah's eyes moved to the Persian rug in the center of the room, deep red, gold-threaded edges, far too fine for a man drowning in debt. Silas liked the appearance of wealth. She knelt and gripped one corner, dragging it back inch by inch. The rug was heavy, thick with dust underneath. Her fingers brushed bare wood. Then she saw it. One plank slightly lighter than the rest, the nails newer. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She pulled the small kitchen knife from her apron and slid the tip into the thin seam along the board's edge. It resisted at first, then lifted with a soft creak that sounded louder than a gunshot in her mind. She froze. No footsteps, no shout. Slowly, she pried the board up and set it aside. Inside the hollow space lay a leather-bound ledger and the cobalt blue twin of the vial in her pocket. Her breath caught. There wasn't just one bottle. There were two. Proof. This wasn't medicine. This was a supply. She grabbed the ledger first, flipping it open with shaking hands. The pages weren't neat farm records. They were coded at first glance, numbers, initials, dates. But Sarah had spent years helping the old plantation bookkeeper before he died. She knew how men hid sins behind ink. Her eyes scanned down the most recent page. Payment to Dr. Renfield, confidential. Apothecary shipment, New Orleans. Quantity, 3 vials. 3. Her stomach dropped. Then she saw a line that made the room tilt. Projected inheritance, $2.4 million in land and gold. Outstanding debts, $1.8 million. Solution, heir secured. Transition within 30 days. Blame allocated. Blame allocated. Like it was an item on a shopping list. At the bottom of the page, written harder than the rest, ink pressed deep into the paper. The nurse's grief makes her believable. Sarah stopped breathing. He had planned it from the start. The tremors, the drugging, the story about her being unstable. He wasn't trying to save the child. He was preparing to kill him at the right moment, after the will was signed, and hang Sarah for it. A sound creaked in the hallway. Footsteps, heavy. Getting closer. Sarah slammed the ledger shut, shoving it back into the hiding space. She hesitated, then grabbed the spare blue vial and tucked it into her bodice. Now there were two pieces of proof, 2 chances to survive. She dropped the floorboard back into place, rolled the rug over it just as the doorknob rattled. The door opened. Silas stood there, swaying slightly, a glass in one hand. For a split second, his eyes narrowed. "Why are you in here?" he asked softly, more dangerous than a shout. Sarah lowered her gaze instantly. "You asked for fresh towels for the guest rooms, master. I thought there might be clean linen in the cabinet." Silas stared at her, long, suspicious. Then from downstairs came the sharp knock of a cane hitting wood. Uncle Bartholomew had arrived. Silas's attention snapped away. Greed always won over caution. "Get back to the nursery," he muttered, brushing past her. "And make sure the child looks peaceful." Sarah walked out on steady legs. But inside, something had changed. She had walked into that room a frightened woman holding poison. She walked out, holding evidence. And Silas Thorne had no idea that the noose he prepared for her now had his name on it. The sound of the carriage wheels crunching over gravel rolled through the house like distant thunder. Sarah stood by the nursery window, the baby cradled against her shoulder, his small body warm and trembling. Below, through the lace curtain, she watched the front drive. The black carriage had stopped. A servant rushed forward to open the door. Then he stepped out. Uncle Bartholomew Thorne looked less like a man and more like something carved from old bone and bitterness. Tall despite his age, wrapped in a dark traveling coat, he leaned heavily on a silver-topped cane. But there was nothing weak about the way his eyes moved. Sharp, measuring, hungry. He wasn't here for family. He was here for proof his bloodline was worth his fortune. Behind Sarah, the nursery door creaked open. Silas entered, already sweating despite the cool evening air. His smile was stretched too wide, his movements too fast. "He's here," he said under his breath. "Remember what I told you. Quiet, baby. No shaking." Sarah nodded meekly. Inside, her heart was hammering so hard, She thought it might shake the child itself, because now she knew something Silas didn't. There were 2 vials, and one of them was no longer in his control. Heavy footsteps climbed the staircase. Slow, deliberate. The tap, drag, tap of the cane echoed closer until it stopped right outside the nursery door. Silas straightened his jacket like a man preparing for inspection. The door opened. Uncle Bartholomew stepped inside, bringing with him the cold scent of rain and tobacco. His gaze passed over Sarah without recognition, like she was furniture, then landed on the baby. "Let me see him," he said. Not please, not may I, a command. Sarah stepped forward and placed the infant gently into the cradle. The baby stirred, his tiny fingers twitching as the last of the earlier dose wore off. Silas moved quickly, placing himself beside the cradle, one hand gripping the rail so tightly his knuckles went white. "He's strong," Silas said too quickly. "Growing fast, sleeps well." Bartholomew leaned down, his eyes narrowed. "He's pale." "It's the heat," Silas replied instantly. "Makes everyone sluggish." Bartholomew didn't answer. He kept watching. The room fell silent except for the baby's breathing. Then it happened. A tremor rolled through the infant's arm, small but unmistakable. Bartholomew's cane stopped tapping. "What?" he said quietly. "Was that?" Silas laughed, a brittle cracking sound. "Just a startle reflex. Babies do that." Another tremor, stronger this time. The baby's leg jerked against the blanket. Bartholomew slowly straightened. "I buried a brother who shook like that," he said. "Weak blood. Cost his family 20 years of reputation." Silas's hand slipped into his vest pocket. Sarah watched the panic hit him. His fingers searched. Left pocket, right pocket. Nothing. The color drained from his face, because the vial he thought he had was hidden against Sarah's skin. He looked at the bedside table. Empty. His eyes snapped to Sarah. For a heartbeat, the mask dropped, and she saw it. Fear, real, animal fear. "Silas," Bartholomew said, voice like a blade, "tell me why this child looks drugged and sick at the same time." "He's not drugged," Silas snapped, too fast. He pointed at Sarah. "She handles all his feedings. She's been unstable since her own child was sold. Grief does strange things." Sarah lowered her eyes, played her role, silent, small, but her mind was racing. This was the moment, not yet to reveal everything, but to plant doubt. Bartholomew turned to her. "What do you give him?" "Milk, sir," she said softly. "Only what master gives me to mix." Silas's head whipped toward her. "Liar." "Enough," Bartholomew barked, slamming his cane on the floor. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. The baby startled, and then the seizure hit. His tiny body stiffened, back arching, fists clenched. A thin cry escaped his lips before foam gathered at the corner of his mouth. Sarah moved on instinct, turning him gently to keep him from choking. Bartholomew stared in horror. "This child is poisoned," he whispered. Silas staggered back. No, he was fine this morning." "Call the doctor," Bartholomew ordered. Silas didn't move, because a doctor would know. A doctor would see opium withdrawal. A doctor would ask questions. Now Bartholomew roared. Silas bolted from the room, but he wasn't running for a doctor. Sarah knew that. He was running to search her quarters, to find the vial, to destroy the evidence. But he wouldn't find it, because while Silas tore apart mattresses and trunks, the second vial rested quietly inside Uncle Bartholomew's travel bag in the hallway, right where Sarah had hidden it. She looked down at the seizing baby, then at the old man whose fortune depended on him. The game had changed. Silas thought he could frame her, but now, every path he ran down led straight toward his own grave. Silas tore through the slave quarters like a man possessed. Blankets flew, trunks overturned, dishes shattered against the walls. He grabbed a young field hand by the collar and slammed him into a post. "Where is it?" he roared. The boy shook his head, terrified. He didn't even know what it was, but Silas did. The blue vial. Without it, he had no way to prove Sarah poisoned the child. Without it, the doctor would start asking questions he couldn't answer. And upstairs, Uncle Bartholomew was watching everything. Silas stormed back into the main house, boots pounding across polished floors. Servants scattered out of his path. His breathing came ragged now, not from running, but from panic. He went straight to Sarah's small sleeping room near the kitchen. He ripped open her mattress. Nothing. He smashed open her wooden chest. Only folded clothes. He grabbed her blanket and shook it like a wild animal. Empty. A slow, creeping dread began climbing his spine, because there was only one other place she could have hidden it, and that thought was too dangerous to finish. Upstairs, the nursery had turned into a sick room. The baby lay limp now, breathing shallow but steady after the seizure passed. A wet cloth rested on his forehead. Bartholomew stood by the window, cane tucked under his arm, watching the road, waiting for the doctor. Sarah remained beside the cradle, calm on the outside, storm inside. She heard Silas's footsteps before she saw him. He burst into the room, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. "They're searching the grounds," he said quickly. "One of the servants must have stolen the medicine." Bartholomew turned slowly. "Medicine?" Silas swallowed. "A sleeping tincture. For the baby's rest." Bartholomew's gaze sharpened. "You drug an infant to make him appear healthy?" "No, just to help him sleep, while I am here to judge the strength of my bloodline?" Silas opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because the truth was rotting in the air between them. A knock came at the door. The doctor had arrived. Dr. Hensley was a thin, gray-haired man who had delivered half the county and buried the other half. He approached the cradle with quiet focus, placing 2 fingers on the child's neck. He checked the eyes, the breathing, the tremor still faint in the fingers. Then he stood. "This child has been given opium," he said plainly. Silas felt the floor tilt beneath him. Bartholomew's cane struck the wood once. "Explain," he said. Silas pointed at Sarah. "She prepares the milk." The doctor frowned. "Opium. This concentrated doesn't come from kitchen herbs. This came from a vial." Bartholomew's eyes moved to Silas's vest pocket. "Empty. You have such a vial?" the uncle asked. Silas hesitated. "Too long. I had one. It's missing." "Convenient," Bartholomew said. At that exact moment, a young house servant appeared in the doorway, pale and shaking. "Sir, I was putting away your travel things, Mr. Bartholomew, and I found this in your bag." He held up the cobalt blue vial. The room froze. Silas's face went white. Bartholomew slowly turned, took the vial, and held it up to the light. "You hide poison in my belongings?" he asked quietly. Silas stumbled backward. "No, I didn't. She must have put it there." Bartholomew looked at Sarah. She met his gaze, calm. "Why would I hide poison in your bag, sir?" she said softly, "when I would be the first they hang?" The logic landed heavy. Silas began to unravel. "She's lying. She hates me. I sold her child." The words slipped out before he could stop them. The room went silent. Even the doctor looked up. Bartholomew's voice dropped to a whisper. "You sold her baby and left her to feed yours?" Silas realized too late what he'd revealed. Sarah didn't cry, didn't speak. She simply let the truth sit there like a loaded gun on the table. Bartholomew handed the vial to the doctor. "Test it." Dr. Hensley uncorked it, smelled, then dipped a cloth inside. "Strong laudanum," he confirmed. "Enough to keep a grown man asleep for a day." Bartholomew turned back to Silas. "You were going to drug the boy until the will was signed, then blame the nurse when he died." Silas's lips trembled. "Uncle, please." "Guards," Bartholomew called. 2 house guards stepped into the room. "Search his study. Every drawer, every ledger." Sarah felt her pulse steady, because she knew what they would find. The hidden book, the purchase records, the plan written in Silas's own hand. Silas Thorne had spent years thinking power came from owning people. But tonight, power came from the truth. And the truth had just changed masters. Absolutely. Chapter 5 will be the climactic finale, the reckoning for Silas and the liberation for Sarah. The house trembled under the weight of its own secrets. Silas Thorne, once the master of men and money, now stood cornered like a rat. Bartholomew's gaze was ice. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtain seemed to echo his wrath. "Guards," the old man bellowed. "Every inch of this plantation. Nothing is to be left unturned." Silas's face drained of color as the men fanned out, ransacking his private study. Drawers were pulled, shelves overturned, ledgers pried open. Every scribbled note of deceit, every hidden purchase of poisons, every cruel plan, it was all laid bare. He stumbled back, unable to speak, his carefully constructed web of lies crumbling faster than he could comprehend. Sarah stayed in the nursery, eyes on the infant, heart pounding, but for the first time not with fear. She was calm. The truth was her ally now. Caleb stood in the shadows by the window, ready to act if Silas tried anything desperate. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation, the kind of silence that comes just before the thunderclap. Bartholomew's cane tapped the floor in slow, deliberate rhythm. You thought I would not see, Silas. You thought I would allow my bloodline's fate to be determined by a man who poisons infants to secure inheritance? Silas's lips quivered. I didn't mean... Don't speak. Bartholomew cut him off. I've lived 70 years, and I've seen men like you. Men who think cruelty is cunning and fear is loyalty. But loyalty cannot exist where evil resides. Outside, the carriage wheels ground to a halt as more witnesses arrived. Lawyers, distant relatives, and neighbors called to testify about the plantation's strange events. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. The shaking air, the missing vial, the opium-laced milk, and most damning, Silas's own ledger detailing the plan to kill the child and frame Sarah. One of the guards returned from the study, holding the ledger like a trophy. Sir, this is all here, every page, every detail. Bartholomew took it carefully, flipping through with a steady hand. And here, he said, pointing at a line written in Silas's jagged hand. The nurse is the perfect vessel. Her grief provides the motive. The child's weakness provides the necessity. His voice cracked like a whip. Do you deny writing this? Silas stammered, sweat rolling down his temples. It's not what it looks like. But words had no power here. Truth had already spoken. The doctors confirmed the opium. The ledger confirmed intent. And Sarah's calm composure in the face of a lifetime of abuse spoke louder than any scream could. Bartholomew turned to her. Sarah, you are free. Not only free of this man's tyranny, but free of the lies that bound you here. Sarah felt her knees weaken. For years she had carried grief, rage, and helplessness. Now, it seemed, all of it had been vindicated. Caleb stepped forward, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Together, they watched as Silas was escorted away, restrained, face pale and twisted in disbelief. Outside, the infant's tremors began to subside naturally, without the vial, without drugs. He looked up at Sarah with wide, innocent eyes, the faintest curl of a smile brushing his lips. Sarah whispered softly, You're safe now, little one. No one will ever harm you again. The plantation air seemed lighter somehow, the oppressive humidity replaced with the promise of justice. Neighbors murmured in astonishment as the story spread. The cruel master unmasked, the nurse who had endured unspeakable pain finally vindicated, and the heir who might have been lost saved by the courage of a single woman. By nightfall, the house was quiet. Candles flickered in the windows, casting shadows on walls that had witnessed greed, cruelty, and terror. Sarah sat by the cradle, the infant sleeping peacefully in her arms, and for the first time in years she allowed herself a small, shuddering laugh. Freedom wasn't just about leaving. It was about surviving, outsmarting, and reclaiming what had been stolen. Silas Thorne would live, but only as a man stripped of power and dignity, a cautionary tale whispered along the Louisiana swamps. Sarah, however, would thrive. The ledger, the vial, the memory of cruelty, all had become instruments of her liberation. And as the moon rose over the plantation, casting silver light across the floorboards, one thing was certain. In the shadows of oppression, courage and cunning could shine brighter than any fortune, and a single act of defiance could topple even the most ruthless of tyrants. The game had ended. Sarah had won.